Medieval peasants knew something about survival we've mostly forgotten. While we throw money at gadgets and supplements, they turned fields, tools, water, and time itself into a quiet machine that fed entire villages. Start with the ground under your boots. Picture 3 long strips, each with a different destiny, one bursting with grain, one planted with spring crops and legumes, one resting under a clean fallow. Nothing mystical, just rhythm. Seed here, pasture there, rest over yonder. The soil catches its breath, weeds are denied a throne, and you get harvests that don't crash the year after a good season. It's crop choreography, and it works because the land likes habits more than heroics. Then watch the plow bite. Not a toy, an iron-lipped heavy moldboard that flips the earth like a page. You feel the pull in your shoulders as the oxen lean. You hear the wet tear of loam as the coulter slices forward and the share rolls a dark, rich seam to the side. That single turn buries the old weeds, airs the root zone, and sets the next season's story. In a world of wooden spades and sawbacks, this thing is a THUNDERCLAP. But water is the quiet partner. A mill race doesn't brag, it just guides a stream to a wooden wheel that turns all day. Grain grinds. Yes, but the wheel does more than flour. Sluice gates open, and parched beds drink. Channels braid through plots, pausing long enough to soak a thirsty strip, then slipping back to the brook. A village that can steer water, can steer fortune. Irrigate when clouds sulk. Drain when storms overstay. Keep the wheel turning when hands are tired. And the soil, it eats, too. A dung cart tips a steaming heap, straw forked through for air, ash sprinkled like a pinch of salt. Heat builds, white threads lace the pile. Turn, breathe, turn again. Come back when the steam has faded and the sweet, dark crumble clings to your fingers. That's tomorrow's bread, hiding in yesterday's barnyard manure, ash, and compost, knitting a tired plot back to life, without a single sack from far away. None of this happens alone. The open fields stretch past a hedgerow, broken by balks and boundary stones. But the work runs on shared calendars and traded favors. One family's oxen pull another's plow in the morning. That afternoon, the plow comes back the other way. A reeve tracks strips on a slate, tokens change hands, and arguments stay mostly on the ground instead of in the air. Cooperation isn't charity out here. It's irrigation for trust. Walk the garden, and you see the small allies. Brassicas under a soft feather of dill, peas climbing wattled hurdles while marigold-like blooms keep the bed lively and the soil busy. Beans feed the ground as much as the pot. Leeks, shade, herbs, beckon bees, and everything shares the narrow aisle without a fuss. Companion planting isn't a trend. It's manners, roots and leaves negotiating space. Scents distracting nibblers. Flowers paying the bees in honest coin. Livestock completes the loop. Pigs root stubble where the sickle left off, turning soil and hunting grubs the way they were born to. Sheep drift across the fallow, dropping tomorrow's fertilizer with every soft step. Chickens patrol like tiny sheriffs, pecking the troublemakers from leaf and clod. The animals eat what the field can spare, and the field eats what the animals leave. Nothing wasted. No corner idle. They watch the sky like a ledger. A ring around the moon. Expect frost. The wind on the wrong cheek at dawn. Delay the seed. Saints' days mark the seasons on doorposts. A stick of notches holds the memory of rains and early thaws. It isn't superstition when you've tested it for 3 lifetimes. It's a calendar written in cloud and dew. They sow on promise, not on panic, and they reap when the air says, now. Seeds have stories, too. In monastery cloisters, a brother labels clay jars by candlelight try from the hill plot. Barley that shrugged off last year's wind. Peas that climbed clean and sat heavy. Winnow on a cold day. Keep the best, share the rest. Discipline at the jar means mercy in the winter. The scriptorium preserves prayers, on vellum and harvests in pottery, both copied faithfully, both carried forward. And when the feast arrives for creatures you didn't invite, the whole village turns strategist. Boys clap boards to lift starlings from the rows. Mustard and other trap strips lure pests to a less important plate, while the main dish grows on. Ladybirds hunt patiently along hedges. Hedgehogs patrol dusk. And timing becomes a weapon. So a breath earlier to dodge one brood. A breath later to starve another. Rotate the strips so yesterday's banquet is today's empty hole. Birds, timing, trap crops, beneficial hunters, and rotation, the 5 fingers of a single hand. That's the part we've misplaced. Not the tools, the rhythm. 3 fields breathing in turns. Iron that flips the earth once, not 10 times. Water that carries work. Waste that becomes wealth. Neighbors that shared seasons as if they were rope. Plants that guard plants. Animals that feed fields and are fed by them. A sky you can read without a screen. Seeds kept like scripture. Pests answered with patience and pattern instead of panic. Call it primitive if you want. Out here, it's just what works. We like to think survival is about gadgets and upgrades. Medieval peasants knew better. They built a living system: fields, tools, water, neighbors, sky that ran like clockwork and kept everyone fed. Begin with the land itself. 3 strips, 3 rolls, 1 rhythm, 1 strip heavy with grain, 1 sown to spring crops and beans, 1 laid to rest so it can breathe. Rotate them like gears. The soil recovers, weeds lose momentum, and next year isn't a gamble. No miracles, just discipline in rows. Now feel the tool that made that rhythm bite. A moldboard plow, iron-faced and unapologetic, cuts a seam through sod. The coulter slits forward, the share turns a dark ribbon on its edge, and the furrow stands clean behind it. Oxen lean into the yoke, the handles shiver in your palms, weeds buried, roots aired, moisture tucked where it counts. 1 pass redraws the page the seed will write on. Water decides whether that page fills. A millrace tugs a quiet stream toward a wooden wheel. Paddles lift, the hub turns, and power hums without a shout. Grain becomes flour, yes, but the same channels sneak along field edges, feeding thirsty beds, skimming puddles off low ground after a deluge. Sluice boards rise and fall like eyelids, irrigate when the clouds refuse, drain when they won't leave. Keep that wheel coursing when hands are sore. Soil is the stomach, and they fed it daily. Pitchforks lift a mound of straw and dung. Wood ash dusts the top, the heap exhales in white breath. Fungi stitch it together, heat climbs, a turn with the fork cools and sweetens. Weeks later, it's black bread for roots, crumbly, rich, and warm to the touch. Nothing hauled from far markets. Manure, ash, and compost close the loop right where the loop begins. None of it works solo. Open fields stretch past markers and box. But the real border is the work plan everyone shares. Your oxen pull my strip before noon. My son returns the team to break yours by dusk. The reeve scratches tallies. Neighbors swap hours the way they swap tools. Common effort doesn't slow the job. Common effort is the job. Cooperation turns weather into a variable, not a verdict. Walk the kitchen plot and you'll see the quiet tactics. Cabbage under a feather of dill. Peas climbing hazel hurdles. Calendula bright along the row. Beans fix the ground, while leeks shade the soil. Herbs lure bees and confuse nibblers with strong perfumes. Every bed stacks functions: leaf, root, flower. So each plant guards the other's back, while feeding the table. Then bring in the animals. Pigs churn stubble into tilth, nosing out grubs and flipping clods for free. Sheep drift across fallow, nibbling low and scattering tomorrow's fertilizer bead by bead. Hens patrol the ridges, stitching lines of prints and pecking trouble from leaf and lump. The herd eats what the fields can spare. The fields eat what the herd gives back. No waste, no idle corner, no broken circuit. Look up. They read the sky like an almanac, written fresh every night. A pale ring around the moon whispers frost. A wind shift at dawn says, hold your seed another day. Saints' days pace the months. Tally sticks remember early thaws and late rains. It isn't superstition. If you've tested it with hunger, it's a calendar you can feel on your skin. They sow when signs align, and reap when the air says ready. Seeds carry memory, and they guarded that memory carefully. In cloisters, a monk labels clay jars by candle and patience. Rye that stood against wind. Barley that filled heavy, peas that climbed clean and set thick. Chaff lifted out in cold breeze. Keep the best, share the surplus. Pages in the scriptorium preserve words. Jars in the storeroom preserve bread. Both are copied, both must be true. When the uninvited arrive, beak, mandible, and grub. The response is choreography, not panic. Boys clapboards and lift birds from beds. A mustard strip draws pests from the prize plot. Hedges host ladybirds and lacewings that hunt like needlepoint come alive. So just ahead of one brood to dodge it, or behind it to starve it out. Next year, the feast moves. Rotation turns yesterday's buffet into today's blank table. Birds, timing, trap rows, beneficial allies, and that relentless turn of crops. 5 moves, 1 plan. That's the lesson we keep missing. It wasn't about fighting nature. It was about speaking her language. 3 fields breathing in turn. Iron that flips a single clean ribbon. Water that works while you sleep. Waste reborn as fertility. Neighbors who keep the schedule as tightly as the hedge. Beds that pair plant with plant. Animals that write tomorrow's harvest with today's. Footsteps. A sky that doubles as clock and compass. Seeds kept like scripture. Pests answered with timing, habitat, and patience. Call it old, if you like. They called it supper. They didn't call it sustainability. They called it staying alive. Every system, every habit had one goal: make next year possible. The three-field dance ran on time like a heartbeat. One plot green with rye, one brimming with beans, one left bare but breathing, resting under the quiet hum of insects. Each turn through the cycle gave the soil exactly what it needed: work, recovery, renewal. Even in the hardest seasons, something was always feeding something else. Nothing was wasted. The heavy plow didn't just change farming, it changed destiny. Picture an iron-shod monster slicing through clay so stubborn no wooden blade could touch it. Behind it, black ribbons of fresh soil rolled open like script on a parchment. Oxen strained forward, muscles rippling, breath fogging the morning air. The sound wasn't elegant, it was survival. That single invention let northern lands bloom where they'd once starved. When peasants called the plow the key to heaven, it wasn't poetry, it was gratitude. Water came next, the invisible ally. Where streams cut valleys, peasants carved narrow channels with shovels and prayer. They learned how to borrow a river's strength without breaking it. The wheel turned, creaking slow and steady, power flowing from drop to grain, from river to bread. Some wheels drove mills, grinding life into flour. Others fed irrigation trenches that shimmered in sunlight, carrying salvation to dry corners. Each turning spoke, whispered the same thing: patience, precision, persistence. And the soil ate well. Compost piles steamed like living things behind every cottage, fed with straw, manure, and ash. The smell wasn't pretty, but the promise was. That black earth, rich and forgiving, meant you could feed a village from a patch that once couldn't feed a family. Ash from the hearth added minerals, and straw added air. They didn't talk about microbes or nitrogen. They just watched the miracle happen, and learned to trust it. Farming wasn't solitary, it couldn't be. The open fields were shared, wide as the sky, cut into strips that looked like a quilt sewn by necessity. Boundaries weren't fences, but understanding. Your team of oxen pulled my plow today, and mine pulled yours tomorrow. The reeve tallied the labor, chalking names on a wooden slate. No one starved when everyone worked in rhythm. The land was common, and so was the struggle. Out there, community wasn't a slogan, it was as real as the blisters on your hands. In the garden, cooperation took another form: plants guarding each other like kin. Beans curled up stakes of hazel, their roots feeding the soil as peas and cabbage shared the same bed. Aromatic herbs, mint, sage, dill lined the borders, warding off insects with scent alone. Flowers weren't decoration, they were strategy. Calendula, tansy, and feverfew stood as colorful soldiers, protecting greens from the unseen war of pests. Every leaf, every root, every blossom played a role. Livestock added motion to the circle. Pigs turned stubble into fine tilth, nosing through soil for fallen kernels and grubs. Sheep trimmed a fallow and fertilized it in the same step. Chickens scratched through compost heaps, spreading tomorrow's nourishment with casual precision. Nothing had to be planned, it was instinct woven into life. The animals fed the fields fed the people, and the people fed everything back. When the sky turned gray, peasants didn't check forecasts, they read omens in wind and light. A ring around the moon meant frost. Clouds piling high in the west warned of hail. They trusted patterns more than prayers. Weather lore wasn't superstition, it was survival memory. In every cottage, tally sticks marked rains and droughts. Saints' days became calendars, guiding when to plant, when to harvest, when to rest. To live meant to listen to sky, to soil, to silence. Seeds were sacred. Inside monasteries, monks became guardians of the future, labeling clay jars of grain in neat Latin script. Each seed carried the best of last year: the strongest barley, the tallest rye, the fattest peas. Out in the villages, peasants mirrored that reverence, trading handfuls of seed as if trading stories. What you planted was your lineage, your insurance, your inheritance. Those jars and pouches were libraries of life. And then there were the thieves, the quiet, crawling, winged kind. But peasants had strategies for them, too. Birds startled by clappers, pests drawn to sacrificial rows of mustard or radish, hedges alive with ladybirds, spiders, and toads, all enlisted allies in the war for grain. Timing mattered most. Plant a week early or late, and the swarm might miss you entirely. Each adjustment, each rotation, was wisdom carved into memory, long before books explained it. That's the hidden genius of their world. The peasants didn't fight nature. They spoke its dialect. They worked with decay, with drought, with the stubborn will of soil. 3 fields turned like gears. The plow wrote its clean lines. Water wheels sang low hymns. Compost brewed in silence. Neighbors shared tools, laughter, and losses. Flowers guarded food. Beasts became gardeners, and the stars kept time for all of it. They weren't waiting for innovation, they were living inside one. They didn't think of themselves as scientists. Yet every decision they made was an experiment that lasted generations. The land was their teacher. Each furrow, each seed, each harvest a lesson written in dirt and sweat. 3 fields turning like a living clock. The heavy plow carving history into clay. Water wheels humming like steady hearts, all of it connected by a single truth. Survival meant cooperation with nature, not domination over it. Picture the early dawn. Over those patchwork fields, mist clings to the furrows, oxen snort clouds of breath, and a man in a wool tunic steadies his plow handles. His children scatter ahead, driving crows from the fresh-sown grain. Behind them, a woman tends the compost heap, turning yesterday's scraps into tomorrow's fertility. The smell is earthy, the rhythm steady. Nothing is wasted, not a drop of sweat, not a handful of ash. The peasants didn't need to label it organic. It simply was. Water trickles through ditches they dug by hand, guided by instinct and centuries of trial. A mill wheel turns, grinding flour by the same flow that waters the garden. In one motion, they harness gravity, river, and time. When floods come, they raise their channels. When drought threatens, they divert from the stream. Each small act keeps the balance intact, a choreography of mud and muscle. The village itself is an ecosystem. The open fields stretch outward, not fenced, but bound by duty and trust. Each family knows which strip is theirs, yet everyone depends on everyone else. The reeve stick keeps score, but it's the rhythm of cooperation that keeps bellies full. A broken plow isn't a crisis when your neighbor lends his team. A bad season isn't tragedy when the next village shares their surplus. Their strength wasn't wealth, it was connection. Walk through their gardens, and the pattern deepens. Companion plants whisper secrets to each other. Tall beans lift toward the sun, shading tender greens below. Marigolds flare between rows, luring insects away from cabbages. Herbs like rosemary and thyme release sharp fragrances that confuse pests and draw bees. It's a living conversation between color, scent, and purpose. Every plant has a role to play. Every weed, even, is a signal rather than an enemy. Animals move through this story like characters in an endless cycle. Pigs grunt through stubble, churning soil richer than any tool could manage. Sheep graze methodically, leaving behind small gifts for next year's barley. Chickens dart between rows, wings fluttering, pecking at beetles before they ever reach the grain. The barnyard hums with purpose. Every creature feeds another. Every sound is the sound of life recycling itself. Above it all, the sky remains their oldest scripture. They read it without arrogance, just awareness. The arc of the sun through the clouds tells when to sow. A sudden chill wind warns of rain before the first drop falls. The moon's halo, the red sunset, the way smoke rises or sinks, all signs, not superstitions. You can't afford to ignore messages written across your only roof. Their almanac was alive. Inside monasteries, another kind of patience unfolds. Monks in rough robes sit at wooden tables, surrounded by clay jars filled with seed. Each jar labeled carefully. Barley from the south field, hardy oats from the high ridge, beans that survived the flood. To them, seed-keeping is sacred work, a quiet defiance against famine. These libraries of life preserve not only food, but memory. Ensuring tomorrow's harvest carries the wisdom of the last dot, and still, nature demands her tax. Insects march, birds raid, disease whispers through the leaves. But peasants learned defense without poison or panic. They plant trap crops to distract invaders. They time their sowing to outwit the hatching of larvae. They welcome frogs, toads, and ladybirds as allies. Even pests become teachers, proof that timing, not strength, wins most battles. Every year, the same war. Every year, new strategy. Step back and the pattern becomes a masterpiece. 3 fields, one resting, one feeding, one growing. Iron blades that open the stubborn earth. Water wheels spinning the pulse of a village. Compost piles steaming with life. Shared labor, shared risk, shared reward. Gardens humming with cooperative life. Animals looping nourishment through the soil. Sky and seed joined in a conversation older than kings. They didn't farm, they orchestrated. Each season, another verse in the song between human hands and the living world. We call it medieval. They called it living right. Because for them, survival wasn't about conquering nature. It was about remembering their place within it. By late autumn, the land exhaled. The last sheaves were stacked beneath thatched eaves. Oxen turned out to the stubble, and smoke coiled from every chimney like a slow prayer. In the stillness, The peasants finally breathed. Their work didn't end, it simply changed shape. The same hands that once gripped plow handles now split firewood, mended harnesses, and sharpened tools by lamplight. Winter wasn't rest so much as reflection, a pause in the great heartbeat of the year. Inside cottages, the rhythm continued. Barrels of salted meat stood in corners. Crocks of pickled vegetables lined shelves beside cloth sacks of barley. Children turned compost heaps behind the house to keep them warm and breathing. The smell of smoke and stew hung thick in the air, mingling with herbs strung from rafters: rosemary for strength, sage for memory, thyme for luck. Everything in the room served a purpose. Even silence stopped when snow came. It blanketed the fields like a clean page. Nothing moved but crows and wind. Yet beneath that white crust, life prepared its quiet rebellion. The resting field, that third of the rotation, was busy on unseen roots healing, worms working, frost breaking clods into fine soil. The peasants trusted it. They knew spring would answer the same way it always had. Nature's patience was their own. Down by the river, the water wheel kept turning, even in the cold. Slow, deliberate revolutions. Grain still needed grinding, even if there was little to grind. The mill's heartbeat never stopped. Its creak was a lullaby, reminding the village that motion, however small, meant survival. The monks across the valley copied manuscripts in the same rhythm, ink scratching parchment, preserving not just scripture, but notes on weather, seed, and soil. Knowledge was their harvest, too. The animals huddled in warm straw pens. Their breath fogged the air like ghosts of summer. Cows lowed softly, pigs shifted in sleep, and the hens laid a stubborn handful of eggs each week, enough to keep the family's strength alive. Outside, wolves sang their hungry songs in the dark. Inside, the hearth's red core glowed, and the walls held. Humanity and nature, two halves of the same winter symphony, each testing the other. When thaw finally came, it came all at once. Water gushed through furrows, washing the last of the snow into the streams. The smell of wet soil rose up, sweet, metallic, unmistakable. The first green tips of rye speared through the mud like promises. Men and women stepped out, blinking in the new light, shoulders already remembering the weight of tools. There was no grand announcement, no signal, just one look at the sky. And they knew it was time again. The first plow cut through the softened field, the blade shining with the last frost. The oxen leaned in, muscles quivering, and the earth rolled over in dark ribbons once more. Children ran ahead to scatter seed by hand, their laughter carrying across the fields. Each movement echoed the same pattern their ancestors had carved centuries before. The miracle wasn't in what was new, it was in what endured. By midsummer, the world was gold again. Wheat bowed heavy under the sun, bees hummed in hedgerows, and the water wheel's song quickened with the thaw. Everything that had slept now sang. Villagers moved like clockwork, cutting, binding, stacking. The reek of sweat, grain, and sun filled the air, and through it all ran the same invisible logic. The understanding that every handful harvested was borrowed, not owned. What you take, you must give back. When dusk fell, the fields glowed amber and shadow. Old men sat at the edge of the ridge, watching the horizon with quiet satisfaction. They knew that the land remembered. Every furrow turned, every seed sown, every beast tended it. All came back in the next season. The next life, the next prayer whispered into the soil. The system worked not because it was perfect, but because it was humble. And so the cycle continued. 3 fields in rotation, feeding one another. Iron plows biting into the earth. Compost heaps, steaming through frost. Neighbors trading labor and laughter. Herbs guarding crops. Animals enriching soil. And skies dictating time. It was never just agriculture, it was faith. Lived daily, proven in bread and breath. We look back now and call them peasants. They called themselves caretakers. They didn't rule the world beneath their feet, they belonged to it. And maybe that's the part we've forgotten. Survival isn't about control, it's about harmony. The medieval farmer understood that truth better than most of us ever will. When night settled over the fields and the last ember dimmed in the hearth, a quiet certainty remained, the same one that had guided generations. The earth would rest, they would rest, and when dawn came, both would rise again, ready to begin the dance once more.